Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Facebook Live from CGTN, brought live to you from Switzerland, where just an hour ago, the World Health Organization declared that the global emergency of a COVID-19 pandemic is over. So what the World Health Organization has said is that the global emergency that they declared more than 3 years ago on the international scale is now finished. But that doesn't mean that the COVID-19 pandemic itself is over. It just means that the global emergency is done with finally. So we heard earlier from the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros, and who made his opening remarks before this press conference where they made the announcement. And he said that on 30th of January 2020, he had to declare a public emergency on international level when, of course, the news of COVID-19 pandemic have been spreading for several months at that stage. And when he made that declaration, fewer than 100 cases were seen outside of China in the world. And of course, now in 3 years' time, the pandemic has turned the world upside down. And Tedros was saying that there have been at least 7 million people who have died from COVID-19, but he said that really the true figures are more likely to be as high as 20 million people. And of course, that's all still remains to be investigated exactly what the numbers are. But of course, it's 7 million people at least. It's a huge impact on the world. And also Tedros was saying that not only that people were dying, but also the COVID-19 has had a huge impact on health systems around the world. It caused economic disturbances around the world, and it caused transport disturbances, and it plunged millions of people into poverty. And so, of course, the borders between countries were closed for a long time, and people were isolating, and that caused anxiety and loneliness among so many people around the world. Well, also that COVID-19 pandemic, the impact that it's had was so big that eroded trust among the people and the governments. And the COVID-19 pandemic, it laid bare the inequalities of the world, because according to Tedros, the poorest people of the world were the last ones to receive COVID-19 vaccines. Well, also he's been saying that for more than a year now, the pandemic has been on the decrease. So the numbers that we've been seeing for weekly infection rates for compared to 1 year ago are much lower now. They've been steadily decreasing over the last year, and this is why this decision even has been made. So and also most countries, they have been coming back to life, to normal life over the past year, and many countries are now generally back to their normal lives with no restrictions imposed. But so the World Health Organization has been, of course, in charge driving this whole pandemic for more than 3 years. And they had set up an emergency committee, which has been meeting every 3 months. So yesterday, actually, they met in Geneva. This emergency committee met for the 15th time. And this is when they recommended to Tedros to declare the end of the global emergency. So, but that doesn't mean, so COVID-19 is over as a global emergency, but it is not. And the World Health Organization reiterated that it is not over as a pandemic. It indeed still thousands of people are being infected every day, and still thousands of people are fighting for their lives because of COVID-19 infections, and thousands of people around the world are still feeling the post-COVID effects as well. So indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't just gone away, it's not finished, but the global emergency, it's no longer like this. So now this emergency committee that has been meeting for every 3 months for the last few years, now what they will do, they will start, instead of being an emergency committee, they will start recommending to the governments and to the public on how to manage the COVID-19 pandemic that we are left with right now. What the World Health Organization is saying is that, of course, the COVID-19 virus is still killing people. It is still changing. There are new variants that are coming out. So there are still huge risks, according to this. It imposes actually to the health systems and to the global health. And so what the WHO said is that if needs to be, that this committee will go back to being an emergency if the case gets out of hand again, or if there's any reason for why it should go back to an emergency. So what the World Health Organization is saying is that don't let your guards down. It doesn't mean that now it's no longer a global emergency. It doesn't mean that governments and countries and people should let the guards down. Indeed, no. It's just a transition from an emergency, global emergency, to managing this pandemic. So the WHO said that they carefully considered the situation around the world and the data that has been analyzed, and they have decided to remove this global emergency and to establish another committee which will recommend to the public on how to manage COVID-19. So also Tedros, when he spoke in his speech on this press conference on Friday, he thanked the WHO staff who have been working day and night for more than 3 years, who have been, of course, driving this pandemic and guiding the public around the world on steering this pandemic. And what they're saying is that now it's the moment for celebration around the world with this removal of this global emergency. It's a moment to celebrate because it's a moment to celebrate the innovation of vaccine developers. It's a moment to celebrate medical professionals who have been working day and night trying to manage, to control this pandemic, to governments and to us, the public as well. But it's also a moment for reflection at the same time, because the COVID-19 pandemic has left deep scars on the world. And it serves as a permanent reminder that new viruses may emerge, and they probably will emerge in the future. And of course, COVID-19 pandemic is leaves us painful lessons that we must learn, and we owe that to those people who we lost to this COVID-19 virus. And so what the WHO says is that the most important thing to do now is to learn those lessons and to take that into the future should the need ever arise for this. And we must make a change in how we manage global pandemics. So there are, the WHO says that there are tools to prepare for pandemics faster in the world, but globally, the problem is that those tools were not used properly. They were not used jointly at the same time among the countries. So we need to work towards the shared response to actually to see any changes to how we handle global pandemics like this in the future. And so what the WHO is saying is that the COVID-19 has changed our world. It has changed us. And we must change the way that we go forward from this, the way that we treat future pandemics, the way that we treat any other global emergencies in the future that may arise. And so this experience must change us, the public and the world, for the better. Well, also, as well as Tedros, we've been hearing from other experts that are part of this emergency committee, and the head of this emergency committee, he said that on January 2022, so last year, there was a 10th meeting of this emergency committee, and they were already discussing the question on how should we remove this global emergency. Even last year, this question was already raised, but the world was not quite prepared for that because the pandemic was still causing chaos in the global health systems and so on. So, but this discussion has been in place since since early last year. And so why does it actually happen now? So what they say is that the main criteria to remove this global emergency has been finally met. Of course, the virus still continues and the pandemic is by far not over, but it is time to change the tools that we use. And so this is why now the WHO has declared that this global emergency is over. But at the same time, of course, now what we'll have to see in the coming days and in the coming weeks, there's so many questions remaining among the people. What happens next? What does this mean for me? What does it mean for my family? Because, of course, even though most countries have been returning back to normal life, there is still COVID, there are still infections happening around us. And so what the World WHO is saying is that we must remain vigilant. We must remain on alert because the virus is still around. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just that the global emergency of the situation has been lifted. So that's what it is. And definitely what the World WHO is saying is now time to embrace and to celebrate those people who've been lost to COVID, and also to the health workers who have been working so hard over the last few years. And also just to congratulate that we are past that emergency level, that past that emergency state that the world has been in for the last 3 years and several months. So since January 2020, the world has been in the state of an emergency when it came to a COVID-19 pandemic, and now that's now been lifted. So surely there will be some celebrations and some relief signs around the world, and among the governments and among health workers as well, and definitely for the World Health Organization itself, who have been tirelessly holding press conferences, updating the public, updating journalists around the world on the latest situation on this COVID-19 pandemic. So certainly there will be a relief that now the emergency state is finished, and that now maybe even they can breathe a little bit and to rearrange how this whole situation is handled. So now, definitely with this new committee on recommending on how to manage the COVID-19 pandemic, there will be many questions on how often do they meet, what kind of recommendations they will issue. We will have to see what happens with this committee in the coming weeks. But certainly it is a moment to say thank you to the World Health Organization and to health workers around the world, and to anybody, to congratulate all of us really for getting through that period, through that emergency, and getting now to this new stage of this COVID-19 pandemic. But yes, the main message is that we must still remain vigilant. We must still stay on alert. The COVID-19 pandemic is not over, but we are past the emergency state of that. So thank you very much for staying tuned to this live. And I hope that you can also take a moment to celebrate and to reflect, just like the World Health Organization asked us to earlier. And thank you very much for listening.